What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. And Brian Twining, without a NASCAR race this week or next, we're able to sneak in some more fantasy football content. So, very excited to talk about all the things we're going to talk about today. But we're going to talk running backs. We're going to update you on the Rams situation. We're going to talk some other situations that are giving us some cause for pause and whatnot. But I wanted to pick your brain, and I want to ask you this off the top. Which player, as we're rolling towards season, is starting to become a lot more interesting, or you're like, you know what, I'm going to be leaving a lot more drafts with this guy, or you've been, in best ball or mock drafts or whatever you're doing. Do you find yourself being a lot more intrigued by somebody? Because I have a name if you want to think about it.
Well, I mentioned him on our previous running back show, and the first guy that comes to mind for me is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think I'm going to own him in pretty much as many leagues as I can actually get him in, just knowing the kind of offense that he's playing in. And I think the other guy, you and I were kind of texting about this particular individual, and I've started to see some more like hype videos, and this is probably the guy you're going to talk about, but that's Chris Carson. Like, who is there in Seattle to challenge him for the job? And, he's shown
that is not the name I thought you were going to go to.
Woo!
That's interesting because we are going to be talking about some running backs today that are in kind of that, I don't know, like 15 to 20 something. I feel like we obviously talked DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins, and obviously Clyde Edwards-Helaire were both on board with that, especially at the ADP. But there's a lot of names in there that we kind of just gloss over. We tend to talk about the early guys in our top 12 or guys that are, could be values, and we haven't really gone in between. So I wanted to make sure we got into some of those names, and since we're there, let's just do it. Chris Carson is not somebody I find myself gravitating towards, and I don't know why. There's positive news on Rashad Penny, but I mean, death taxes and positive news about Rashad Penny heading into the season seems to be a thing this, past few years. And then all of a sudden the season starts and he can't stay on the field. He can't stay healthy. Carson has missed time. And, this offense as a whole has me puzzled heading into 2021. Because the first half, it was the Russell Wilson show, and this is finally they let him go, and he's doing all the stuff, and then the second half, it's like, oh yeah, no, this is the Seahawks offense we've always seen, and why are they pulling the reins off of Russ and feeding Chris Carson, who's absolutely incredible. 2 years ago, where he ran for 1,230 yards. Last year, played about half the season, 141 attempts, 681, and 5 touchdowns. Like, when he's on the field, he's awesome, but he's missed time. He's in an offense that, I guess I'm optimistic that they start throwing more, and maybe that's something I shouldn't be doing.
I just look at this team, and as much as we want to let Russ cook, they went through that stretch, 3 of 4 games from week 7 to week 10, where they lost to a bunch of really good teams because they couldn't keep the ball away from those teams' offenses. And then you saw what they did over the latter half of the year, where they started to get more run heavy. They started to utilize Chris Carson's strengths. They started to keep the ball on the ground to keep that clock moving with that young defense they had. And that's how Seattle won. Now, I know everyone's enamored with what DK offers on the outside, along with Tyler Lockett and the rumors early on in the offseason of Russell Wilson wanting out of Seattle unless they kind of unleash his skills. But this team goes as the running game goes. And Chris Carson, if he can stay on the field for a full 16 games, we're looking at a dude who's going to produce upwards of 1,200 rushing yards. Last year, he matched his career high in receptions and receiving yards in 3 less games. So they started to use him in the passing game as well. And I'm just, as we get closer and closer into draft season and the NFL season's coming near, Chris Carson for me is skyrocketing up my list of guys I want on my team.
Yeah, if he's playing 14 or 15 games and seeing the kind of volume we saw in 2018, 2019, this is a guy that has the potential to be 11 to 1200 yards, to be, 7 to 10 touchdowns. And then if you, like you mentioned last year, we see that increase in the passing game. All of a sudden, this is a guy that has a chance to be in that top 5 to 7 conversation at the position. And he's not being drafted like that. So I get it. There's a ton of upside baked in, but there's also a ton of downside baked in. We also saw last year that, despite playing 12 games, he only saw 141 attempts when he'd seen 247 and 278 the two previous years. Carlos Hyde got involved. DJ Dallas got involved.
I think
While
that
none
was
of
more
these guys, what's that?
protecting Carson from himself, knowing the
Yeah.
style of runner he is,
Well, right,
especially
but
late
that's
in
what
the
I'm
year.
wondering. Is there a scenario where the Seahawks go, we want to be good, we want to keep Chris Carson healthy for the playoff run, and they limit his touches, they limit his work, and find ways to get him the ball? Maybe, if he sees a consistent uptick in targets, and even if he's seeing 200 touches or 200 attempts instead of 250, I could get there. If he's 1,000 yards, but then he's also 40 catches, like that could be somebody I'm interested in. But I get, 37 catches last year, 37 the year before.
I
I
think
don't know. I hem and haw on him because I don't know what to do with this, and I go back and forth, and I want to be excited because I see the upside and I see the potential, but I also see the downside, and I also see the names in the range that he's going with, and it's just hard for me to get there.
Yeah, and I guess another way to look at this too is, I mean, we can't put too much emphasis on this being that this was last season and last year. This is new, but when you look at his snap percentages on offense, he only reached 70% of the offensive snaps once throughout the entire season, and every other game was right around that 50% mark. So that's just kind of an indication of the way that Seattle likes to deploy multiple backs, the way they like to run out of a lot of shotgun formations with Russell Wilson back there kind of doing what he does. But they cannot rely on Rashad Penny, whether he's healthy or not. He just can't stay on the field. We don't really know what we're going to get out of him. DJ Dallas, I mean, yeah, he's great for fantasy for maybe 1 week last year, but he's not going to threaten Chris Carson in terms of like usage and stuff like that. And if we see them start to implement him further in the passing game, I just think that kind of, if he's averaging 65% of the offensive snaps on a weekly basis, then he gets into that top 10 market for the running back position easily.
So let me ask you. Obviously, we're going to talk the Rams backfield here in a second. We're going to talk about Cam Akers falling out of your top 12, and is Chris Carson currently one of the names in your top 12?
Chris Carson he's right there. I'm having a really difficult time with like the last 3 guys in my top 12 right now.
Well, let's play a little quick name game. This guy or that guy, whatever you want to call it. You're on the draft. You're drafting. Obviously, I'm going to give you a layup here: Chris Carson or Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Oh, I'm taking CEH on that
one. Chris Carson or Najee Harris.
Man, give me Chris Carson. I have a really difficult time trusting the rookies.
Chris Carson or Antonio Gibson.
Man, I love Antonio Gibson.
Because the question that I asked you, Brian, he's the guy for me. Antonio Gibson is vaulting up my rankings.
Well, see, he's already been there for me. So
right. Let's see. I moved him.
All right, Antonio Gibson over Chris Carson, just knowing the way they want to deploy him.
I moved him in as my RB9 right now, just behind Zeke, Jonathan Taylor, and Aaron Jones. He was a guy that was kind of in that tier 3 for me. I do worry about some of the other pieces being involved, especially the passing game. What's the dude with the dreads that catches all the passes? Totally blanking right now.
Gosh,
the listeners are probably screaming at me.
He's number 41 last year.
Anyways,
so PPR monster. That's all.
Yes.
Hold on, I'll find it.
This is gonna drive me crazy. Anyways, but yes, Antonio Gibson, especially if you look at his J.D. McKissick. Boom.
There you go. Boom.
Thank you for everybody screaming at me. I remembered. He's a guy that, if you look at his numbers over the second half, was a workhorse, a volume monster. We expect this offense to be better. We expect Fitzmagic to take it a step forward with McLaurin, with
Curtis Samuel.
Like, I expect this offense to be really good. Logan Thomas. Logan Paulson's another rando tight end. So he's a guy vaulting for me, but for me, I would take Gibson over Carson. It's not relatively close. What about DeAndre Swift?
Oh man, as much as I like DeAndre Swift, I just don't know what we're gonna see out of this Detroit offense. And
I'm taking Swift, and it's not really close. I know the Jamal Williams factor is there, and he could be annoying, and especially in the red zone. But the work in the passing game, I think, is going to be consistent with Swift, and I think 60 to 70 catches is within his range of outcomes, and that's something I can get on board with. I'm always going to pound the table for Miles Sanders. I know a lot of people might not go there, and I might look like an idiot because that's where my head goes. What about Josh Jacobs?
I'm
out.
Last year I was all in on him.
Him and Kenyon Drake are either going 50-50, or some people are going to get in a screaming deal on Josh Jacobs, and we're all going to look foolish for not drafting him at his ADP.
No, we were fed the same bull crap last year about Josh Jacobs being utilized in the passing game more, when in reality they basically gave him the same exact kind of scheme that deployed him in very minimal opportunities to catch passes. I just don't think this Raiders team likes him in that role, which is why they went out and got Kenyon Drake. So like you said, I think this is at best a 60-40 split, with Drake seeing the majority of all the passing game.
Last one, Chris Carson or David Montgomery?
Give me Chris Carson. There's just he's on an offense that we're drafting Russell Wilson inside the top 5 at the position, DK as one of the top wide receivers, Tyler Lockett is a lock for a wide receiver 2, and Chris Carson. I mean, how do you not take a guy on this kind of offense that's going to average 30 points a game pretty close to half the year? So
sure, but you're also talking about an offense that has Allen Robinson, who could be a top 5 option that we both love. It has Darnell Mooney, who's ready to take off and be a legit factor. Cole Kmet, you talked about him. If you missed our late round quarterback and or tight end finds, make sure you go back and check those episodes out. It's a 3-episode week. You're welcome. Cole Kmet, somebody I'm definitely excited about. I like Anthony Miller. And if my boy Justin Fields or your guy Andy Dalton, however you want to see it, see the field, I expect big things. So yes, will they be Seattle? No. And probably Carson's a safer bet from a volume standpoint, but Montgomery could be in a better offense. He's much not better than the Bears last year, not better than the Seahawks.
Okay.
Better offense than last year, less competition, and doesn't have the health concerns that we've seen with Carson. Granted, last year was the big year, and 2 years before he played majority of the games. So if we get 14, 15 games, he'll be great. But there's enough discussion for me to potentially lean David Montgomery. And I don't really love him kind of in general. Like, I'd much rather go with Swift or Miles Sanders or even Mike Davis.
Yeah. Real quick on the full Monty, David Montgomery last year for me was one of my favorite value picks at running back, just kind of going into his second season and then thinking of what the possibility was with him in this Bears offense. And we got to kind of see that when Tariq Cohen was out. But if you take away that added receiving down work that Montgomery saw, he put up a very similar season as he did his previous year, where he really wasn't that amazing. I mean, we're talking, he saw only 5 more carries last year. Yes. Almost 120 yards more, and he doubled his amount of targets. But is that going to happen with the addition of Damian Williams and the possible return of Tariq Cohen, after the first couple of weeks that he's taken off the PUP list? I don't think so. So for me, Montgomery kind of falls back into that middle tier RB2 at best, kind of, floor, or you're hoping at worst top high end RB3 category. Just knowing the possibility, the range of outcomes for the Bears offense is like this, whereas Seattle, it's
Sure.
you know what you're getting.
Yeah, I guess my concern with Montgomery is what do we see? Is the player we saw over the last 6 or so games the player we're going to get? Which I love that player because he won me a fantasy championship. He was one of the biggest reasons.
Yes, me too.
But we also saw inconsistent workload early in the season. Then he saw volume and was just not very productive with it. Once again, if the offense takes a step forward, if the offense is better, then maybe it's easier for him to find the gaps. This is a guy I loved coming out of Iowa State, and notoriously, there's the picture that goes around Twitter every so often when he breaks out that everything is a comp to Saquon Barkley, and they basically compare him to the best running backs of all time, and he's supposed to be this like Frankenstein of amazing running backs, which is always hilarious. But yeah, a guy that I it's weird. It's like I get excited. I'm excited about a player coming out of college. I don't see it right away, and then I just completely write them off. And that's a horrible trait I got to get rid of. And I'm also a little bit of a hipster, so when everybody likes him, I hate him. When everybody hates him, I like him. It's just I'm not really sure why that is, but this is the world we live in.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that because I'm very similar in that aspect.
So let's talk about the Rams situation because I think we'll talk about where Darrell Henderson ends up. For me, it's going to be in that similar range. That's why I think it makes sense to talk about him here. Cam Akers out, done for the year. Darrell Henderson in as of now, basically your guy. There's not really a path to someone else being there now. There's going to be names. Obviously, Twitter is great with Adrian Peterson or Todd Gurley or Frank Gore or some other senior citizen that probably won't get run. There's other names like Duke Johnson. Maybe we could talk about potentially like one of the Steelers guys, Benny Snell, Booger Jr. Maybe Tampa Bay's like, hey, Ronald Jones is the guy, or Ronald Jones isn't the guy, and they get rid of one of those guys. Either way, let's work at it with basically Henderson is your guy. Maybe they sign a camp body or somebody who in the fourth quarter could get 5 carries and fall down. But if Henderson goes into the season kind of the way it is, or they sign some other jabroni that no one's really going to care about, what are reasonable expectations? Because if you look at last year's numbers, Akers and Henderson basically did the same thing, only Henderson was better, was more effective, and scored more touchdowns. So I'm not really sure what we're doing here if all of a sudden we're going from Akers being a top 10 pick, obviously projecting forward, and then now that Henderson's coming in. So I guess where are you at with Henderson? What are your expectations for him in the current scenario, landscape, whatever you want to call it?
Well, I mean, I want to lead it off with I really hope they sign Adrian Peterson. I would love to see all day running that one cut
scheme. 706. Bring Gurley in for a feel good thing and let those
Todd
let
Gurley's,
the Rams jerseys go back and everything will be great. I just what does that help? What does that do?
All it would do is just spell Darrell Henderson. But for me, if LA does not go out and sign anybody and Henderson's only competition are 2 second-year guys and Jake Funk from Maryland, people will be getting funky with Darrell Henderson in their lineups because you're looking at a team who prior to last year, when they had Todd Gurley, McVay had no interest in letting anyone else see the carries out of this backfield. Yeah. He wants one guy to carry the load. And if it's Darrell Henderson, we saw kind of the talk 2 years ago when he came in. Everyone was enamored with what he could do. They thought that year was the year he was going to take over for Todd Gurley. It didn't happen. They went out and they drafted Cam Akers last year. And both of them, like you said, they produced very, very, very similar numbers. Now with Akers not in the picture, this is going to be the Darrell Henderson show. And I mean, especially right now, his ADP is going to start skyrocketing up the board. So if you're in drafts right now, you might want to kind of jump ahead.
I'm going to go over 4 for 4 has underdog ADP, and it rotates. It's only basically the last 48 hours. So I'm really curious to see where he's going. I think the other important thing we talk about here, Brian, is Malcolm Brown's out of the picture too. He was a guy that was
Oh,
involved a little bit. So that
a little
even,
bit too much.
it split up the pie just enough to make it frustrating. Now so right now he's running back 30, going 90th overall after Damian Harris, after Raheem Mostert, after let me see what Chase Edmonds, um,
That's
before
disgusting.
before Michael Carter, Ronald Jones, Zach Moss. Like if he's in that range, I'm
Oh,
gonna have so much Darrell Henderson. It's gonna be insane.
I'm gonna have him on 100% of rosters if
Because
that's
I'm
the
looking
case.
at my rankings. Right now I have him as RB 25, kind of in that range. I feel like I need to vault him though. Like I feel like I'm too low on him at that point, but then we're talking about, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, David Montgomery, Chris Carson, J.K. Dobbins. I'm probably going to move him above Dobbins as much as I like Dobbins as a player. The Lamar factor, the Gus Edwards factor, all that stuff.
Lack of
I
receiving work.
Yeah, like I need to move him up. So
Look,
um,
this is getting extremely aggressive here, but and when looking at ADP and stuff like that, I think Darrell Henderson's like ceiling is a lot closer to. I mean, this is going to sound ridiculous, but top 5 than it is finishing outside the top 20 at the position. I just think that if he's handed the job and it's his job solely, you're looking at a guy who's getting into an offense with a better quarterback. They're likely to just be that much more efficient on offense with the offensive genius and Sean McVay running this system. To me, there is no chance in hell that if he has this job to himself, and there's no other competition, that he's not finishing inside the top 12 at the position.
yeah, if we get 16 games from Darrell Henderson in this situation, a top 10 and maybe top 5 finish, I don't think is
Yeah.
crazy. Now, my
No.
question is, does Sean McVay just hate Darrell Henderson and will be happy to sign Adrian Peterson or Todd Gurley or some other jabroni that gets cut and give them 40% of the work or 60% of the work and just drive his value into the ground? Because like we've seen it. Like he's been there a couple of years. They obviously took Akers to basically supplant him. Henderson had 138 targets, 624 yards, 4.5 yards per carry. Amazing work. Gets tons of work in the passing game. Got 24 targets, 159 yards. I'd like to see those numbers rise, but if that's what we're seeing, if we extrapolate that number over 16 games and 40%, give him 70, 80, 75% of the work, whatever you want to call it, you're talking about a top 5 running back. Like as much as we love the talents of some other guys, you have to take the situation into account when you're looking at a one season sample. And that's going to make Henderson soar and make guys like Miles Sanders and J.K. Dobbins and even DeAndre Swift have to go below him. And that's just the upside. Now, we don't want to draft that way because of the question marks and because of the McVay factor. And, is there a scenario where they're happy to let Stafford kind of shoulder more of the load, and maybe some of that work that Akers was going to get ends up in Henderson's lap, but also more ends up on the passing game. They find because Robert Woods is a versatile player; they can do a lot of things with, a lot of unique ways to keep Cooper Kupp involved. They have a lot of pieces in motion that even if they don't sign a running back, they don't. He doesn't see 250 touches basically. So that's what I'm factoring in. But for me, like he should be in that. He should be in that range that we were talking about with David Montgomery, with Chris Carson, with I'm trying to pull up ADP here. Like I would take him. Cam Akers was going 13th. I'm guessing that's factoring in a few of the drafts where he's dropped because he was pretty much inside that top 10. This is full PPR, by the way, over on Fantasy Data is where I'm pulling these numbers. But like, I feel like he should be ahead of the CEH, Dobbins, Carson, Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Miles Sanders group.
I honestly, I would put him right there with CEH in terms of value for this upcoming season if it is his job. Just like I'm going back to the previous years when McVay first took over the job here, and I mean the first year there, Gurley saw almost 280 carries, with the next guy at 63.
Yeah.
And then the next year in 2018, Gurley at 256, I think it was 256. 2019, it was Gurley 223, cut back slightly.
I'm a little worried because McVay did say he probably used Gurley a little too much, and that big part of why his knee is I mean, obviously he had injury concerns and issues coming in, but McVay did mention, I'm kind of mad at myself for using him quite that much, and if that's a reason, but we saw the splits last year, but I think. For me, it felt like it was more of a Malcolm Brown was the secondary piece, and then the first half it was Henderson, the second half it was Akers. I don't feel like there was like a trio of shuffling. I mean, I should go back through and kind of refresh myself on the numbers, but I feel like if Henderson is the guy, sees 70% of the touches in this backfield, even if somebody else is kind of involved, even if it's like Xavier Jones popping. As a complementary piece, you're talking about a top 20 guy at worst and a top 5 to 7 guy at best.
Yeah. Okay. So real quick, last season, Aaron Jones had the 10th most carries of all running backs at just 201.
Okay.
Now, to me, 200 will be. I mean, if Darrell Henderson's the only guy there, how is he not going to reach 215, 220, especially with the 17-game schedule this season, placing him right near that top 10 mark for a team that will move the ball? And that was with, guys ahead of him were Melvin Gordon, Jonathan Taylor, Kenyon Drake all saw more carries than him. And those guys didn't even score inside the top 10 at the position. So now you're looking at a guy who's playing in a top 10 offense, getting 200 plus carries as, yeah.
This is a Rams offense that ran almost 400 times between Malcolm Brown, Darrell Henderson, and Cam Akers.
Now they have one guy.
Obviously, there will be other people. Obviously, you won't see 400 carries.
I think it's reasonable to expect, 16, 17 carries per game on a low end for Henderson.
Yeah, 200 to 250 touches in the ground game and another 40 or so targets is kind of what I expected at minimum. And we expect this offense to be better. So that means better touches, more red zone touches,
opportunities,
more touches with less people in the box trying to slow down the running game. I'm very, very bullish on Henderson. And the more we talk, the more I feel like I need to shoot him up my rankings.
And not release this video until after the season starts.
Unfortunately, we're here to help the people, Brian. That's what we do.
Yes, but our league mates see this.
And if you know what, Brian, if people are going to reach an extra 3 rounds to go get this guy, we'll be able to get somebody else we really like.
I guess. All right.
Before we get out of here, we're almost to the 30-minute mark. We've been going a little long, but that's okay. Let's talk about the Bill situation, because I was tweeting at you.
Yep.
That I might get on board with the Zach Moss experience. I don't know that I can do that. I wanted to be excited. I really did. I don't know if you listen to the Late Round podcast or read JJ Zacharyason's work over at Number Fire, but he's doing some really good research on ambiguous backfields that, we as fantasy football analysts and players and whatnot, like we make bets, we make predictions, and sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. Oftentimes when you're looking for a breakout, grabbing a running back, the running back one being drafted. So, for example, in San Francisco, Sermon's going ahead of Mostert in most leagues. Sermon would be the bet, that kind of thing. So I wanted to be excited about Moss, but I dug into the numbers and I looked at kind of the production, and I also got a tweet from our good friend Jared Smola, who provided this information. We talked about it when he was on.
No.
Over the last 3 seasons, a running back carry is worth 0.63 PPR points. Now, if you're talking standard, whatever. But I think anything half or full, you're going to be wanting to factor this in. And an RB target is worth 1.544. So basically double. Or actually a little 2.5 times, I guess. I just don't like if you look at the numbers from last year, Singletary saw 156 attempts, where Moss only saw 112. Singletary was more productive, 4.4 to 4.3. Didn't scored half the touchdowns, but we know touchdowns kind of shift from year to year. But the more important thing is Singletary in a split saw 50 targets, where Zach Moss only saw 18. The passing work is going to be critical. Now, this conversation may all be all for naught because they're going to use both these guys not enough to actually be fantasy relevant.
Yeah.
Josh Allen is going to get all the rushing touchdowns, and we're banging our head against the table thinking, why aren't either of these guys breaking out? Well, that's just kind of the offense. But this offense has so much potential, should be scoring so many points. Josh Allen keeps rolling, Stephon Diggs, Manny Sanders, Gabriel Davis, Cole Beasley, whatever. There's so much potential for a running back to be fantasy viable, yet we're doing this song and dance with Singletary and Moss, and I want Singletary to be the guy, and I've been talking about it, and you've been Team Zach Moss, but the passing work combined with the more effective, even if just slightly, Devin Singletary, like I don't know how Zach Moss is the bet in this backfield.
It's going to take an injury. I mean, gosh forbid, it's going to take an injury to either one of these guys for either one to kind of get into that fantasy into lineups. I mean, looking at their ADP from fantasydata.com, you're looking at Zach Moss going as RB 38, sandwiched by James Conner and Kenyon Drake. And I'd take both of those guys, with James Conner maybe seeing the red zone work with Arizona, and then Kenyon Drake seeing the passing down worth with Las Vegas. And then you have AJ Dillon, the aforementioned Darrell Henderson, which that'll definitely go away. Gus Edwards is still behind him. Tony Pollard for Dallas. I would even take Latavius Murray and Alexander Mattison as handcuffs prior to drafting either Zach Moss or Devin Singletary, just with their limited usage in general. You just can't trust them on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on your draft, right? Like if you draft elite options and you're looking for home run hitters that could be game changers, barring an injury or whatnot, maybe you will look at a Tony Pollard, or maybe you look at a Gus Edwards. But I think if you're drafting, like I tend to draft, with Travis Kelce and some receivers and kind of working your way that way, and then by like the fourth, fifth, sixth round is when you start really looking at running backs. I think taking a bet on one of these guys to become the option, I think makes a lot of sense. Like you're looking at Ronald Jones, Trey Sermon, and then the Buffalo guys. Like if you can get
give me Trey Sermon any day over
for sure.
either of these two.
Yeah, but I mean that's the discussion, right? Like I would take, would you take either the Tampa Bay guys over the Buffalo guys?
Man,
because we both love Rojo. Like that's our dude.
Probably,
but we did see Fournette kind of vulture a lot of the touches, especially down the stretch.
And then we don't know what Gio Bernard's going to offer, but
right, no, another satellite back that's going to be involved. So there goes passing work. So send Rojo to the Rams. Let him feast, and then we're good. But
hey, he'd be right back at home.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's a hard bet to make. So I don't know. Like you said, it's probably going to be a situation where we just pass on both these guys. But like I wanted to make the bet on Zach Moss, and I can't. Like he's not. I don't think he's super duper talented. I don't think he's super duper athletic, and I don't see a path to him being the monster in a share role. Like I don't see him getting enough passing work to garner 70% of the touches and vault. So if I'm taking a bet, it's on Singletary. But as we mentioned, that's after I bet on Sermon. That's after I bet on Ronald Jones. I would take him before David Johnson, before Zack, before James Conner, Kenyon Drake, AJ Dillon, all those guys. But also, yeah, I mean, it would kind of depend on roster construction too. But yeah, I'm betting on upside if I'm betting on running backs in the middle rounds, and Singletary is kind of that like third or fourth option in that chunk.
Man, that just sounds so disgusting. Yeah. I really don't know what to do with this
But
backfield.
that's
I'm still
like
on the
this
side of
whole
Zack Moss,
range.
but
This whole range is gross. Like we're talking about the Denver guys. We're talking about Damian Harris, who I think could be really interesting, especially that Cam Newton prediction you have comes to
Cam,
fruition,
Cam,
but
Cam, Cam.
doesn't catch passes. So what do we do with him there? I'm very bullish on Chase Edmonds. He's another guy that's kind of in that guys I'm going to be really excited about.
Oh, okay. Real quick before we get out of here, I wanted to hit on Chase Edmonds with the rhetoric being thrown out there by DeAndre Hopkins. How much of an impact would that make on Arizona offensive players in fantasy if Hopkins were to say sit out?
No player is gonna not get. They're complaining about missing one game check. They're not gonna sit out the whole season and not get a whole game check.
Now, I agree, but a lot of these dudes have already made their millions. So I mean,
yes, but they also have a lot of stuff that's set up to keep paying bills for. So
that's true.
these guys have a limited window, right? They have a 10-year window or 7-year window or whatever they can get their hands on. Even until they blow their knee out, or until this, that, and the third. I don't like if you're like, even if you play your prime years and you're amazing and you play a long time, by 35, 36, 37, you're kind of cooked.
Unless you're Tom Brady, of course.
Well, right. Like there's always going to be one, an outlier, but like I just don't see that. But if you want to work in this fictional world where DeAndre Hopkins sits out the year, Christian Kirk through the roof, Rondell Moore through the roof, Chase Edmonds. I mean, I'm already on team Chase Edmonds. If more volume goes his way, I'm going to be very excited about that. But this is going to be a very horizontal offense with Christian Kirk running 9 routes and everybody else within 5 yards of the. Like, we're going to have 5'9" Kyler Murray throwing to 5'9" Rondell Moore. Like, they're going to have to work something in, and it's going to be weird, but.
Hey man, Wayne Corbett was an all-pro receiver.
Yes, but did he play
5'6"?
with I don't know. His quarterback wasn't also 5'9", and there's a difference between Wayne Corbett, who I think was probably closer to 5'10", than a guy who's probably actually 5'8" or 5'7", listed at 5'9".
Very true.
But yeah, I mean, we'll see. There's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of talk a lot of times before the season starts. And then by the time the season starts, everything's hunky-dory. I'm kind of expecting Aaron Rodgers' situation to be like, remember we talked about Aaron Rodgers retiring? That was funny.
Yeah, exactly. He'll be there week 1 for the Packers. I mean,
yeah. So let us know down in the comments which running backs you think we're missing out on, which running backs you think we're crazy to be excited about. Like I said, Fake Pigskin is going through a redesign, and it's very exciting news, very exciting stuff. If you've made it this far, congratulations. There will be rankings up on the website. You will be able to see who I like, who I don't like. But, we're trying to get all that stuff out through the pod to let you guys know. Yeah, I think we hit on a lot of good names. Oh, Matt Harmon will be joining us on Monday, so make sure you check that out. Talking second-year wide receivers. If you want us to make sure we hit on somebody, make sure you comment below. I will also try and tweet that out, as well as go back and check our late-round quarterbacks, our late-round tight ends. We'll have late-round receivers and late-round running backs coming in the short term. But wanted to get some information out, wanted to talk Darrell Henderson, wanted to talk some of the other names that are kind of interesting, and some of the names that we tend to just skip over.
Yeah.
So, for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.